Now for the news in detail. We begin in the U.S., which has recorded over 1,400 new fatalities from the new coronavirus, as some states say they are planning to lift stay-at-home orders. The worldwide death toll has now crossed 119,500, with over 1.9 million infected. More on that now in this report.
Tumbling economies and socio-economic woes are forcing governments to consider lifting lockdowns despite the continued spread of the novel coronavirus. 10 states on the U.S. East and West Coasts are planning to lift their strict stay-at-home orders. But contradicting state governors and legal experts, President Donald Trump says it is his call to make.
The President of the United States calls the shots. If we weren't here for the states, you would have had a problem in this country like you've never seen before. We were here to back them up, and we've more than backed them up. We did a job that nobody ever thought was possible.
The World Health Organization says it will release strategic advice including 6 criteria for lifting restrictions on movement. Meanwhile, European countries are extending the lockdown, saying it has been extremely effective in decreasing the spread and deaths in the region. Britain's Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, too, backed the approach.
As we're going through the peak of the crisis with the death toll at the level that it's at and increasing, we're absolutely keen to make sure, absolutely determined to keep our eye on the ball and our focus on what will save lives, which is people staying at home and protecting the NHS in that way.
Elsewhere, China has approved early-stage tests for 2 experimental vaccines for the virus as the country battles to contain imported cases.
Pakistan says nearly 1,400 patients across the country have recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic so far. The health ministry said with 342 new cases, the infections number has risen to over 5,700. The ministry said 3 deaths in the past 24 hours have increased the toll to 96. It said over 3,100 tests have been conducted since yesterday, taking the total number to nearly 70,000. The ministry said 53% of the infections are local, while 47% of cases were imported. In Indian-occupied Kashmir, the Indian government has extended the total clampdown under the pretext of the coronavirus spread. Indian forces have so far arrested over 50 Kashmiri civilians this month for allegedly violating the curfew in the valley. In a notice, New Delhi said containment approach in the occupied territory includes a 100% lockdown. It said the complete restriction on any movement across the valley will be imposed, imprisoning civilians in their homes. The curfew and internet ban have already made it extremely hard for Kashmiri doctors to fight the virus. The valley has been reeling under an Indian curfew and communications blackout for the last 254 days. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has condemned attacks on Muslims in India over COVID-19. Indian media and the government have been blaming Muslims for spreading the virus across the country. In a statement, the Commission criticized the continued scapegoating and attacks on Muslims in India due to false rumors. It said these attacks are often accompanied by dangerous rhetoric by politicians. The religious freedom bodies said this stigmatization can breed further discrimination and violence in the country. Meanwhile, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced an extension of the countrywide curfew until May the 3rd. On March 21st, Modi had imposed a sudden clampdown, plunging the country into panic, a migrant crisis, and essentials shortage. The U.S. and Taliban have held another round of talks in Doha over the implementation of the peace deal and the delay in prisoner release. The Taliban said the Mullah Baradar-led team, U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad, and General Scott Miller discussed violations of the deal. Spokesperson Sohail Shaheen said Qatar's foreign minister hosted the meeting to discuss probable solutions to all issues. Earlier, Khalilzad urged the Afghan government and Taliban to accelerate efforts to meet the targets outlined in the deal. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has said U.S. sanctions against Tehran and Caracas are unjust. Rouhani was speaking to the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on the telephone. The Iranian president called for the two countries to cooperate with each other within the OPEC Plus group. He said America's illegal sanctions on both countries are against international regulations and human principles. Rouhani added that there is a need to continue cooperation for the reduction of oil production and the return of stability to prices. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his rival Benny Gantz have been given 2 more days to reach a deal on a unity government. That extension was approved by President Reuven Rivlin minutes after Gantz's 4-week mandate to form a government expired. In a joint statement, Gantz's Blue and White Alliance and Netanyahu's Likud party said significant progress has been made towards a deal. The statement said the 2 leaders held direct talks to finalize a deal for an emergency government. Without a deal, it will be up to Parliament to pick a candidate who would then have 14 days to form a government. Failure to form a government would automatically trigger a snap election, which would be Israel's 4th in a year. Seoul says North Korea has launched multiple short-range cruise missiles into the sea between the Korean peninsula and Japan. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff claimed Pyongyang fired surface-to-ship cruise missiles into the Japan Sea for 40 minutes. The Joint Chiefs of Staff said the missiles flew about 150 kilometers in the drill involving several military aircraft. The officials said South Korean and U.S. intelligence were analyzing the latest launch in a series of recent weapons tests. North Korea test-fired 9 short-range ballistic missiles and other weapons in March amid stalled nuclear talks with the U.S. Libya's UN-recognized government of national accord says it has seized control of 5 more cities from Khalifa Haftar's Eastern Army. A GNA spokesman said government troops recaptured the cities of Al-Ajalat, Al-Jamail, Ragdalin, Al-Isa, and Zeltin. The seizure comes after GNA gained control of Surman and Sabratha cities yesterday. The spokesman said government troops are chasing out Haftar's Eastern Army from the area. The latest military gains allow the GNA to secure the road from the Tunisian border to Abu Ghraib southeast of Tripoli. Meanwhile, the head of the Presidential Council, Faiz al-Sarraj, has warned groups against supporting Haftar. He said they must opt out of the region or face fierce repercussions. Turkey has said it will continue with its weekend curfews to stem the spread of coronavirus. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the next curfew will be on April 18th and 19th. He said Turkey would complete the construction of a new hospital for COVID-19 patients in Istanbul's Başakşehir by May 15th. Erdogan announced the establishment of 2 new hospitals with a total of 350 beds in Istanbul. The Turkish president has ruled out any borrowing arrangement with the IMF during the pandemic. The country has over 61,000 infection cases with nearly 1,300 deaths. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said Moscow may draw on the defense ministry's resources to tackle the coronavirus if needed. Speaking at a meeting with senior officials, the Russian president said the situation has been constantly changing due to the spread of the virus. He said the next few weeks would prove decisive in the battle to halt the contagion. Putin also said Russia might need to call in the army to help tackle the coronavirus crisis.
Ministry of Defense service members are working quite effectively abroad, helping our colleagues abroad fight this infection. They have considerable experience working in difficult conditions. It's necessary to use this experience, of course, but keep in mind that all the capabilities, including the capabilities of the Russian Ministry of Defense, if necessary, can be and should be deployed here.
Southeast Asian leaders have agreed to launch a coordinated fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The leaders of the ASEAN member countries made that pledge at a virtual summit chaired by the Vietnamese Prime Minister. Singapore's Prime Minister termed the pandemic the gravest public health crisis in 100 years. The Prime Minister said it is critical for ASEAN to mount a united response. He said none of the countries in ASEAN can be truly safe unless the entire region is safe due to the region's high interconnectivity. The association's members also agreed to ensure regional supply chains remain open. To address urgent needs of member states during the pandemic, ASEAN leaders have agreed to establish a joint fund and medical stockpile. China has said there is no discrimination against Africans in the country. Beijing has rejected U.S. accusations of the mistreatment of Africans in Guangzhou as an attempt to harm China's relations with African nations. During a daily briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said China's friendly policy towards Africa has not changed, and neither will the friendship. In recent days, Africans in Guangzhou have claimed they were ejected from their apartments by their landlords. Zhao said local authorities have conducted an investigation and have rolled out a series of new measures to deal with the issue. Officials said a total of 111 Africans in the southern Guangzhou city have tested positive for the coronavirus as of Monday. I'll be back after this break with plenty more news. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund has approved immediate debt relief to 25 member countries under its Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust. The list includes mostly struggling African countries, with the exception of Yemen, Afghanistan, Nepal, and Haiti. In a statement, the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, said the 6-month relief will help countries fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Georgieva said the Catastrophe Containment Fund currently has $500 million, which the IMF plans to increase to $1.5 billion. The World Bank, meanwhile, said it sees huge willingness on the part of official bilateral creditors to suspend debt payments by the poorest countries. The bank's managing director, Axel von Trossenberg, said the G20 and G7 economies have supported its call for a temporary halt in debt payments. Well, the International Monetary Fund has also recognized Pakistan's response to tackling the spread of deadly coronavirus. In a statement, the IMF said both provincial and federal governments have taken several measures against the pandemic. The IMF said steps include quarantining over 3,000 from Iran, closing borders and schools, and lockdown in provinces. It said the government ended the import duties on health equipment and launched a relief package worth 200 billion euros. Meanwhile, Pakistan has thanked China for its financial, medical, and physical support in the fight against coronavirus. It said Beijing has provided nearly 530,000 N95 masks, over 33,000 protective suits, 10,000 testing kits, 36 ventilators, and 100 thermal scanners. In India, a film body has warned artists against collaborating with Pakistan. During the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, several Pakistani singers have held live sessions with Indian artists on social media. In a statement, the Federation of Western India Cine employees said it has issued a total non-cooperation circular banning all collaboration with Pakistani artists. It said some members are violating the circular by working in various modes and media of entertainment. The body said it has been informed more such entertainment products and songs are being planned and made. It said any Indian artist or musician found working with Pakistani artists will be subject to strict disciplinary action. Iraq has said it's killed 23 ISIS militants in clashes in the northern Kirkuk province. The military said fierce clashes ensued after troops found an ISIS hideout cave in the rural area. It said an Iraqi security member was killed and 4 others were wounded in the clashes. Earlier, Iraq's paramilitary Hashd Sha'abi forces said they killed 7 ISIS fighters in the Quk area of Kirkuk. The Iraqi military announced the resumption of operations against ISIS in late January after an escalation in attacks. The U.S.-led coalition has been working with the Iraqi military in these operations. One civilian has been killed and 5 others wounded after an explosive device went off in Syria's central Hama province. State media have accused Turkey-backed rebels of planting the device in the Khashabia area. It said dozens of people have either been killed or wounded by similar blasts in formerly rebel-held areas. Last week, Syria said rebels have renewed their attacks on civilians in the northern countryside of Aleppo province. On to Myanmar, where officials and residents of Rakhine State have accused the military of killing 8 people in a firing incident. The Myanmar army, though, has rejected those allegations, saying it has no information on such an incident. Local authorities said the incident happened in the village of Kyaksek in Ponagyun township of the state. Witnesses say the army opened fire at villagers over unknown reasons, killing 3 members of the same family. Myanmar's army is facing a hearing at the World Court over a 2017 massacre that led to an exodus of over 7.5 million Rohingya Muslims to neighboring Bangladesh. In the U.S., the death toll from storms and tornadoes that ravaged the southern states has risen to 30. Officials said as many as 60 tornadoes ripped through Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi, while severe storms hit parts of Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi have declared an emergency as residents struggle with stay-at-home orders caused by COVID-19. Authorities reported 11 deaths in Mississippi, 9 in South Carolina, and 8 in Georgia, while 2 people died in Tennessee. The National Weather Service said the storm punctured roofs, turned over mobile homes, and downed power lines. The storms have left over 1 million customers without electricity. In the U.S., a Navy sailor has died after contracting the coronavirus on the U.S. aircraft carrier, the THEODORE Roosevelt. This comes after the carrier's captain was fired for raising the alarm about his crew's vulnerability to the virus.
The deceased sailor, whose name is being withheld by the US government for now, is the first active service member to succumb to the COVID-19 pandemic. A statement from the US Navy said he had tested positive for the virus on 30th March. He was moved to intensive care on the 9th of April after being found unresponsive in his quarters. 12% of the THEODORE Roosevelt's crew of 4,600 have tested positive for the virus. Last month, the aircraft carrier's former commander, Brett Crozier, had written a letter to the Navy asking for the Roosevelt to be evacuated and sanitized. This was eventually leaked to the public, leading to Crozier's firing and the resignation of Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Maudley. There has been a massive backlash in the US against the Navy's decision to remove Crozier from his post rather than heeding his warning.
The Democratic Republic of Congo has recorded a 3rd new Ebola case after over 7 weeks without any new infection. The World Health Organization said a 7-year-old girl started showing symptoms after visiting the same health center as the 2 previous cases. The WHO said the girl has a good chance of survival. The global health body said all 3 new cases had visited the Horizon Healthcare Center in Beni. Congo was due to mark an end to the 2nd deadliest outbreak of the virus until a case emerged in Beni last week. The outbreak has killed more than 2,000 people since August 2018 in Congo, where militia violence has hindered efforts to contain it. Ukraine says the wildfire raging through forests around the defunct Chernobyl nuclear plant has now been put out. Officials said hundreds of emergency workers used planes and helicopters to douse the flames. Authorities said the radiation level remained within normal limits and additional protective measures were not required. However, they said short-term spikes in cesium-137 particles were registered in the Kiev area to the south of the plant. Earlier, environmental activists warned the fire near the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster in 1986 posed a radiation risk. The fire began on April 3rd in the western part of the exclusion zone and spread to nearby forests. Antarctica is the only continent in the world that has not reported novel coronavirus cases, and Chile is working to keep it that way. Chile's Navy Commander Alejandro Valenzuela Peña said scientific encampments across the continent remain under isolation within isolation. Peña said the end of the tourist season on March the 3rd enabled them to contain the spread of the virus in Antarctica. The director of Chile's Antarctic Institute, Marcelo Lepe Cartes, said the outbreak on an Antarctic base would be devastating.
We have had a lot of discussion about the potential damage that the expansion of COVID-19 could cause in Antarctic territory, and we believe that it could obviously be devastating for a base. We don't have the hospital capacity that the other countries have. Nevertheless, I think there is a positive point here that if an infection were to occur in the Antarctic base, the contact between bases is very sporadic, very infrequent, with long distances and time between each other, obviously very long distances.
Scientists have discovered the most powerful supernova ever. Astronomers led by the University of Birmingham and Harvard observed an explosion for 2 years and recorded their findings in the peer-reviewed journal. Scientists said this type of a supernova is an extremely rare celestial event. They said it occurs only when stars with extremely large mass undergo violent pulsations before they die, shaking off a giant gas shell. According to the study, this supernova was 10 times stronger and about 500 times brighter than a normal supernova. Huawei's Vice President Victor Zhang says he is focused on keeping Britain connected during the COVID-19 pandemic. The assurance came after multiple towers of the company were burnt down over a conspiracy regarding 5G causing COVID-19. In an open letter, Zhang said it is the biggest contribution Huawei can make to the UK's national effort against the pandemic. He said since COVID-19 hit Britain, data usage has soared by more than 50% or more, placing significant pressure on telecoms systems. Zhang said despite this, there has been groundless criticism about Huawei's involvement in Britain's 5G rollout. The UK has called such conspiracies linking 5G to coronavirus dangerous and nonsense, and has asked social media platforms to do more to stop misinformation. European stock markets are trading mixed as investors look for an exit strategy amid the coronavirus lockdowns. Regional stocks have failed to attract a fresh rally as investors tread cautiously, Frankfurt's DAX is trading over 1% higher. London's FTSE 100 has lost over 0.5% as the index heavyweight British American Tobacco slumped over 6%. The CAC 40 in Paris is trading marginally higher. In Asia, the Nikkei 225 led the gains, closing over 3% higher as SoftBank Group stocks recovered from an earlier drop to jump over 5%. Seoul's Kospi and the Shanghai Composite gained over 1.5%. Experts say market uncertainty is the biggest challenge right now. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. For the latest updates on these and other stories, you can always follow us on our social media at Indus.News. Thanks for watching.